They were starving, half-naked and crawling with lice. Men who once stormed beaches and flew missions now ate maggot-infested rice from rusted tins, watched friends be executed for coughing too loud, and dug their own graves in the jungle heat. The guards called it re-education. The prisoners called it hell. This is the brutal, true story of how Japanese forces treated prisoners of war during World War II. A chapter soaked in blood, pain and silence. Hell in the Pacific, the untold agony of Japan's prisoners of war. The code of Bushido turned savage. To understand the cruelty, you must first understand the culture. The Japanese military followed Bushido, the ancient samurai code that worshipped honor and saw surrender as the ultimate disgrace. In their eyes, a soldier who allowed himself to be captured had forfeited all dignity and deserved no mercy. This belief was drilled into every Japanese soldier. It wasn't just propaganda, it was policy. When the Imperial Army captured Allied soldiers, especially Americans, British, Australians and Dutch, they saw them as less than human. Not soldiers, not even men, just cowards. And they were treated as such. The Bataan Death March, a trail of corpses. In April 1942, after the fall of the Philippines, around 76,000 Allied soldiers surrendered to the Japanese. What followed was one of the most infamous atrocities of the war, the Bataan Death March. For over 60 miles under the scorching sun, POWs were forced to march without food or water. Those who collapsed were beaten with rifle butts, bayoneted or simply shot in the head. One survivor recalled, "If you stumbled, you died. If you spoke, you died. If you looked a guard in the eye, you died." More than 10,000 men perished along the route, their bodies left to rot as a warning to others. In POW camps, survival was a daily gamble. Starvation was weaponized. Rice rations were cut to 500 calories a day. Diseases like dysentery, malaria and beriberi swept through the camps, untreated, ignored. Torture was not an exception. It was a ritual. Beatings with bamboo sticks, iron bars and rifle butts happened daily. Waterboarding, a Japanese invention called torment by water, involved forcing water down the throat and then jumping on the bloated stomach. Prisoners were strung up by their thumbs for hours. Some had fingernails ripped out, others were castrated as punishment. A man was once made to kneel on jagged coconut husks in the sun for 48 hours. His legs were permanently ruined. If one man tried to escape, or even talked about it, the punishment was collective. Entire groups would be executed, often forced to dig their own graves first. Slave labor in the jungle and snow. The Japanese exploited prisoners as slave labor across their conquered territories. The most infamous project, the Thailand-Burma Railway, later known as the Death Railway. Over 60,000 Allied POWs were forced to build it through disease-infested jungles. Men worked 18 hours a day with barely any tools. If they collapsed from exhaustion, they were whipped back to their feet or buried where they lay. Nearly 16,000 died during construction, but many survivors would later say, those who died were the lucky ones. In Japan itself, prisoners were sent to coal mines and steel factories, often in sub-zero conditions. British POWs in Hokkaido froze in ragged uniforms, digging tunnels until their fingers blackened with frostbite. Some fates were even darker. The infamous Unit 731 in Manchuria used Chinese civilians and POWs for live medical experiments, vivisections without anesthesia, frostbite testing, even biological weapons trials. There are also documented cases of cannibalism by Japanese troops in New Guinea and other Pacific islands. Starving soldiers reportedly killed and ate prisoners, sometimes alive. In one 1944 case, Australian airmen were executed and their livers were eaten in a twisted form of ritualized vengeance. Justice denied, voices silenced. After the war, the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal prosecuted some Japanese officers. General Homer, responsible for the Bataan Death March, was executed, so was General Yamashita. But many camp guards and low-level torturers walked free. Japan's post-war government often refused to acknowledge the atrocities, and to this day, war crimes like those at Unit 731 remain a taboo topic. Thousands of POW survivors lived with the trauma in silence. Some were shunned by their own governments for having surrendered in the first place. Their stories were whispered, buried in journals, or carried to the grave. Conclusion: the forgotten suffering. The world remembers the atomic bombings, the kamikaze pilots, and the island-hopping bloodshed of the Pacific. But fewer remember the men who wasted away behind barbed wire, subjected to unimaginable cruelty. They weren't just prisoners of war, they were prisoners of hatred, of ideology, of a war that turned human beings into shadows. If you found this story as haunting and powerful as I did, don't let it fade into history. Hit that subscribe button for more untold, gripping stories from the darkest corners of our past. Because history isn't just dates and battles, it's blood, pain, and truth. Subscribe now before the next story slips into silence.